cold wind bit through Jake Carter's worn-out jacket as he tightened the last bolt on an aging sedan. His calloused hands, rough from years of hard work, ached from the chill, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, busy calculating how much of his paycheck would disappear into rent and what little might be left for dinner. "Another long day," he muttered, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Business had been slow, and with his dream job interview at Thompson Industries tomorrow, he could only hope things were about to change. He locked up the garage, ready to head home, when something across the street caught his eye. A woman stood beside her stalled car at the gas station, steam curling from beneath the hood into the freezing air. Beside her, a little girl clutched a stuffed bunny, shivering against the cold. The woman pulled out her phone, stared at the screen, then sighed, rubbing her temple with an air of frustration. Jake hesitated. He had places to be. But then he noticed the exhaustion etched into her features. Not just frustration, but the weary strain of someone carrying too much alone. Sighing, he grabbed his toolkit and jogged over. "Need a hand," he called out. The woman turned, startled. Up close, she was striking, poised, graceful, but stress dulled the sharpness of her features. "Oh, I don't want to trouble you," she said hesitantly. "No trouble," Jake said with an easy grin. "I fix cars for a living." Relief washed over her face. "That would be amazing. It just died on me." Jake peered under the hood, his trained eye quickly diagnosing the issue. "Bad alternator. It's not charging your battery. I can patch it up enough to get you home, but you'll need a proper repair soon." "Thank you," she breathed. "Really?" As he worked, the little girl, Emma, watched him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a superhero?" she asked, hugging her bunny tighter. Jake chuckled. "Nah, just a mechanic." "But you're saving us," she declared with absolute conviction. Her mother laughed softly. "She's dramatic," she said, shaking her head. Jake only smiled, saying nothing. He knew what it felt like to have no one to call when things went wrong. 15 minutes later, the engine roared back to life. The woman let out a breath of relief. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Jake waved her off. "Don't worry about it." She frowned. "That's not fair. Let's just say if I were in your shoes, I'd hope someone would help me too." She studied him then, really seeing him for the first time. A slow, grateful smile spread across her face. "I'm Olivia," she said. "And this is Emma." "Nice to meet you both," Jake replied. "Thank you, Jake," she said sincerely. "Really?" He nodded, shoving his cold hands into his pockets. "Drive safe." The next morning, Jake straightened his only decent tie, his stomach twisting with nerves. This interview at Thompson Industries could change everything. A steady job. Stability. A chance to stop scraping by. The receptionist led him into a sleek office, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He barely had time to take in the view before the door opened. And in walked Olivia. Jake froze. She smiled. "Good morning, Jake." "You work here?" he managed, stunned. "I do," she said, eyes twinkling. "In fact, I'm the CEO." His mind reeled. The woman whose car he'd fixed, the one he'd assumed was just another struggling single mom, owned this company. I had no idea," he stammered. "I figured," she said with a teasing grin. Then her expression softened. "Do you always help strangers for free?" He shrugged. "If they need it." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, a decision settling in her eyes. "You know, Jake, I was already planning to hire someone for this position based on experience and skill," she said. "But now I know something else. Whoever leads my team needs to have heart." She extended her hand. "Welcome to Thompson Industries." Jake stared at her, barely able to believe it. Then, as warmth spread through his chest, he shook her hand. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it more than ever. That evening, as Jake left his first meeting, Emma's words echoed in his mind. "Are you a superhero?" He had laughed then. But maybe, just maybe, kindness was its own kind of superpower. Sitting at his new desk, he took in his surroundings. The office smelled like fresh coffee and possibility. His work boots felt out of place against the polished floor, and instead of grease-streaked coveralls, he wore a button-up shirt and slacks. It felt strange, foreign, but he wasn't complaining. He glanced at the thick company handbook Olivia's assistant had given him. Supervisor, Mechanical Operations was printed in bold across the cover. This was it. A real shot at stability. A future. Yet something gnawed at him. He was a hands-on guy, someone who felt at home with a wrench in his grip and grease under his nails. Could he really fit in here? Before he could dwell on it, his office phone rang. "Jake Carter," he answered. Hope I'm not interrupting your first big corporate moment, Olivia's familiar voice teased on the other end. He exhaled, some of his tension easing. Just trying to figure out where I fit in. You'll find your way, she assured him. Then, after a brief pause, her tone turned serious. And somehow Jake knew. His story was only just beginning. Jake was halfway through organizing his new office when his phone buzzed. I need you in the garage. We have an issue. Olivia's voice came through, calm but firm. Minutes later, he found her standing near a sleek black company SUV. A small group of mechanics gathered around. One of them, Greg, according to his name tag, looked particularly frustrated, arms crossed as he shook his head. The diagnostic tool isn't picking up the issue, Greg explained. We've tried everything. Jake stepped forward, crouching beside the open hood. Mind if I take a look? Greg hesitated, sizing him up. He was older, clearly experienced, and probably not thrilled about some new boss swooping in with fresh ideas. But after a moment, he nodded. Go for it. Jake didn't waste time. He ran his hands along the engine, feeling for anything loose or out of place. Years of working in cramped garages had trained him to trust his instincts. Within minutes, he spotted the problem, a small but crucial wire barely hanging on. Try it now, he called, securing the connection. Greg turned the key, and the SUV roared back to life. Greg blinked, then let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Olivia smirked. That's why he's here. Jake stood, brushing off his hands. Team effort, he said, offering Greg a nod. Greg studied him for a second before grunting. Not bad, boss. A grin tugged at Jake's lips. Maybe he could fit in here after all. Later that evening, Jake stepped out of the building, the city skyline glowing ahead. He pulled out his phone and stared at the number Olivia had given him. If you ever need anything, she had said, just call. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just surviving, he was moving forward. And something told him this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Jake settled into his new role. It wasn't easy, transitioning from fixing cars in a rundown shop to managing a team in a high-end corporate garage. Some mechanics, like Greg, took time to warm up to him. But Jake knew the only way to earn respect was the way he always had, by getting his hands dirty and proving he belonged. One evening, as he was finishing up paperwork, there was a knock on his office door. He looked up to find Olivia leaning against the frame. Got a minute? She asked. For you? Always. He set down his pen. She smirked. Smooth. Taking a seat across from him, she sighed, rubbing her temples. Long day, Jake guessed. She chuckled. Something like that. Then, after a pause, her expression softened. Jake, I never really told you why I was in that gas station parking lot that night. He leaned in, sensing something deeper. I wasn't just having car trouble, she admitted. I was on my way to an event, one of those fancy corporate dinners. But right before I left the house, Emma told me she missed me. She said I was always working, always busy. Olivia shook her head. So I made a split-second decision. I ditched the event and took her out for ice cream instead. That's why I was on that road. Jake nodded, understanding. Best decision you could have made. She smiled wistfully. Yeah, but when my car broke down, I panicked. I thought, great. This is what I get for trying to be a good mom. Jake frowned. Olivia, you are a good mom. Her eyes met his, searching for something. And you're a good man, Jake, she said quietly. You didn't just fix my car that night. You reminded me why I started this company. It wasn't just about profit, it was about people. The air between them shifted, heavier now, something unspoken lingering in the space between them. So what now? Jake asked, his voice quieter. Olivia hesitated for just a moment before smiling. Now you keep proving me right for hiring you. He grinned. I can do that. A few days later, as Jake was leaving work, a small voice called out behind him. Jake! He turned just in time to see Emma running toward him, her stuffed bunny in one hand, Olivia a few steps behind. Mom says you're a boss now, Emma announced proudly. Jake chuckled. Guess so. Does that mean you can fix all the cars? He knelt down to her level. All the cars. And maybe even airplanes. Emma's eyes widened. Whoa! Olivia laughed, shaking her head. Careful. She'll hold you to that. Jake stood, meeting Olivia's gaze. There was something in it, something warm, something grateful. Want to grab dinner with us? She asked, her voice almost casual. Jake's heart did a little flip, but he played it cool. I'd love that. As they walked toward their cars, Emma skipped ahead, chattering about superheroes. And for the first time in a long time, Jake didn't feel like the guy struggling to get by. He felt like a man exactly where he was supposed to be. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness don't just change someone else's life. Sometimes they change your own.